Hey everyone, welcome to the CSI Secret Store community call. Today is June 25th, 2024. This call falls under the CNCF Code of Conduct. It's recorded and it's published to YouTube. And sorry, July 25th, 2024. And please add your names to the attendee list if you already haven't. I can help moderate the call today. Anyone wants to volunteer for taking notes?
I'll take the notes.
Thank you, Nelly. Okay. In terms of discussion items, I think most of it was added by Abhijit. So, Abhijit, do you want to start going through the questions that you have?
Last week we noticed about the sync controller repo.
Mm-hmm.
So we we were curious about the security concerns. So basically, we are not doing this in the our main controller because uh, there were some security concerns, right?
Right.
So
So, sorry, go ahead. Finish your question.
yeah, uh, how many are still there in the sync controller, and how many we got rid of?
So it's on a very broad level, right? Like more than security concern, it's also about like the user experience that we were offering, right? Just to add a little context, today in the Secret Store, so when Secret Store CSI driver was initially created, the only goal of it was support mounting the secrets from external key vaults into the pods as ephemeral volumes. And then we added support for Windows as well. So there was Linux and Windows. And then a lot of users wanted to use the driver, but they wanted the secrets to be synced as Kubernetes secret so that they can use it for like ingress purposes, the first thing. And the second thing was they also wanted to use these as environment variables. So what they wanted to do was sync it as a Kubernetes secret and then use that, reference that in their pod manifest and say, hey, I want this to be an environment variable, right? And then the third thing, which we never thought about at that time, but also has become prevalent now, is disconnected scenarios. So in the scenario where a cluster can be offline for like 20, 48 hours or 72 hours, how do the pods that are running within the cluster, like if they scale up, scale down, still have access to these secrets that were stored in external key vault? So in these scenarios, like just saying CSI driver will not work because the CSI driver actually makes a call to the provider every time a new pod gets created and the volume needs to be mounted. So before we added the sync as Kubernetes secret on top of the mount, and what that meant is it was heavily tied to the mount, right? So as a user, if you only wanted to sync as a Kubernetes secret but didn't really want to mount in the volumes, there was no option before. You were still forced to do every single thing together. And in the scenario where you literally only wanted the sync as Kubernetes secret, you still had to have like a dummy pod that was running in the cluster, which would mount and then you use that to sync. So a big factor is the user experience. Like there's a single GitHub issue where a lot of users were asking for like, hey, I don't want to have to do these mount operations, which could also fail, and then also tie that to a sync operation. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing is also like in terms of permissions that's granted to driver, we wanted to cut it down. And as a project, we wanted to make sure that we had definitive solutions for like a very specific goal. So right now we have reached the point where we are going to say the driver is only to mount as Kubernetes, mount the secrets in the volume. And then the sync controller is only for syncing as Kubernetes secrets. But these two projects will share the same concepts like secret provider class, how the driver will talk to the provider in terms of RPC and all of that. So that is mostly it. And then in terms of security, like we're cutting down the RBAC permissions that's required. Out of the box, we are reducing what permissions each of the project requires. And then in terms of the sync controller also, like we are trying to do things in such a way that even if someone gains access to the controller, they can't perform any operations they're not supposed to. So we are basically tying it with validating admission policies. And we are also using server-side apply, which means the controller has very minimal permissions. Like it only has permissions to like create or update. It has no permissions to delete. And then using WAPs, you can control what type of secrets it can create and all of those things. So like we're making it a very constrained thing, which gives admin the permissions to say, hey, you can't do anything beyond this, even in the off chance that the controller gets compromised.
Yep. Got it. Thanks. Uh, okay. So the next one. So what is our plan to make it to release it? So I can say that it is in the experimental phase. Yeah.
Right. I'll let Nilek speak about it because he's working.
Right. So yeah, so we are planning to cut a release uh, by early next week, and hopefully like planned for release, and then do beta and J eventually. So we have like around 6 months in our mind to probably release. I mean, fully release it to GA hopefully. Uh, but that's what we are thinking right now. So we are very close. So we are finishing up with some of the unit test cases and E2E tests, so that we'll have a reasonable confidence for in our release.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Thanks.
just to add to what Nilek mentioned, right? So like Nilek has been working with other folks on basically getting the alpha release. And in terms of beta and GA on a very high level, for beta, the things that need to be done is like rotation, support for the controller, and then like ensuring we have all the metrics that we require. And then load testing, we have done load testing on the driver, so we want to do the same on the controller. And also, if you look at the repo now, like we basically have started adding E2E tests with the E2E provider. And then obviously at the beta stage, we would have a very similar small subset of tests with each provider just to make sure that like it works how we're doing it with the driver and all of that, right? And that is the criteria for beta. And then beta criteria plus adoption, that will help us drive it to GA. And as we reach beta, we will also start thinking about how we want to tell users to start migrating from the sync feature in the driver to the controller. And then we will also come up with a timeline on when we want to deprecate the feature on the driver.
Uh,
I
okay.
have created milestones on the repo, and whatever issues we have, I have sort of tried to segregate for at least until beta. So that should give like a
Yeah.
good understanding of work we would want to do for beta and G and alpha.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying something, Abhijit.
Oh, no, no, that's the part about the deprecation that uh, we are eventually going to deprecate the sync from the our main drive, the current driver, right? So yeah, I have
Right.
a question about this.
Yeah. Also,
And
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, and rotation will be present on the both the driver, right?
Yeah. So driver already supports rotation today.
Yeah,
Also, just to give you an update on that, right? So in terms of driver, we have a custom controller that performs the rotation today, which can be configured using a rotation pole interval. CSI, Kubernetes CSI now has this, not now, like for a year now, has this concept of requires republish. So
yeah,
you could basically enable that in the CSI driver spec, and what that tells kubelet is periodically call the driver for every mount this driver is responsible for, and then let the driver go figure out what it needs to do. So instead of us having this controller in our driver, we could rely on kubelet calling us periodically, because that will also mean kubelet will give us like the tokens required for workload identity and all those scenarios. We don't have to have those permissions in the driver. So the goal is to move to that in the driver, so that we can get rid of all the token create permissions that we have today. And once we do that, we will also start moving rotation from alpha. Like if you look at it in the driver, we still say rotation is alpha just because
yeah.
of custom controller. But we'll do requires republish and then start graduating that feature to like beta and GA. And then the controller will still have its own, the sync controller will have its own implementation for rotation because it's a controller. But to answer your question, yes, both the projects will have rotation supported, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and I guess that required republic support was added in 1.23, if I'm not wrong.
Right.
So we will also update that, right? Minimum version supported for the driver
Yes,
is
we
1.23.
yes, we'll update it.
Uh, Okay. So that was mainly, and one old issue maybe the distroless support.
Uh,
Uh,
Before we go to that, I see you had this one. So, was your question for Kep mostly
yes.
related around new features that you wanted to add for the controller? What was it for?
So if okay, I just read it on some sites. So whenever we are releasing a like our new driver, we have to follow some KEP process to release it, right?
So the KEP is basically Kubernetes enhancement proposal. So if you're adding features to like core Kubernetes, you have to go through the process of a KEP. You basically write a KEP, everyone in the SIG reviews it, it gets approved, then you go implement it in a particular release. But that doesn't necessarily apply to the driver and the controller because we are sub projects of Kubernetes SIG auth. But having said that, if you want to add a new feature or if you want to make a design change or any security review, anything related, like major change to the driver, right? The process that we follow is you would come and open an issue on the driver or the controller, and then maybe you can also open a PR, like a draft PR. And we would first talk about that in the CSI community call. So we would talk about it here. And once we
Mm.
think that it's in a state where we can present it to SIGAuth, we would basically take it to the SIGAuth community call and then go talk about it there and get approval from like the auth leads and like the auth chairs. And once they approve it, then there is nothing blocking it. So we would come and then review the PR, get it merged, and get it into the next release.
Yeah. Thanks for the details.
Right.
Yeah. So so the issue here is because we are not using the distress image, we often see the vulnerabilities in this image. So uh, if I remember correctly, last time you said you performed some POC, uh, and like after that, yeah, I could not follow
Yeah,
up with this
so
issue.
so we can't use the vanilla distroless image just because we need some of the capability, right? Like we need the mount capability, which is available in Debian. And the POC
Mm.
that I did was in the Kubernetes repo, there is a image called distroless IP tables. And what they did is they took pieces of the IP tables that is required and then put that in a distroless image and then built an image using that. That does not mean
Oh,
that image doesn't
yeah,
get CVEs. It still gets CVEs because it has
yeah,
another component related to IP tables, but it would still get lesser CVEs which are only related to that. Uh,
yeah. Yeah, I have seen this hacky way in many solutions. So yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
it is still not pure distroless, we can say.
exactly. So like my POC was I took the distroless, but I also built it just with the mount capability. So like I was able to like copy that whatever is required there, and I did that, and it worked, right? I
Yeah.
think the goal was, do we want to go talk to SIG release and say like, hey, we want to publish this image so other CSI drivers can use it? Or should we as a project just start building and maintaining it? But we can't switch to a completely distroless solution. Like that just won't work for us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
But yeah, I mean, we do try and patch on a monthly cadence. So like we've been trying to, so we have like we do app get upgrade and update and all of that on our main image, which means like base image CVs are always patched. And then we also try and release a minor or a patch release every month or 45 days, just so like we fix all the CVs that is there. But it's still a good point. I maybe I'll start a thread with SIG release and see if there is any chance we could do a distroless mount image, just so like we would have to patch CVs less often. So
Yeah. Uh, Thanks. There was one more question which I forgot to add here.
mhm.
I was a little bit confused. So I went through the demo that you published, I guess, in the February uh, from the YouTube regarding this sync controller demo. So there, when we are defining the secret, uh, so there we are mentioning the app provider class object as well as the resource name, right? So instead of, can we just couple them? And I guess we are just using the provider name from the app provider class object, right?
The
Is
provider name from the app. So the
app,
provider
app
name
class,
is still in the SPC.
yeah. So is it just for easy to migrate from the or have a similar structure as of the current driver? Or I just want
Yeah,
to
so
know the rationale behind this design. Yeah,
I think one of our goal was is to share. So it's the same feature that we're extracting out from the driver, right?
yeah,
And one of our goal is to keep the interfaces same, so that it will be easier for existing user to migrate to the sync controller feature. And that's the reason we are saying we sort of made a decision that the secret product class will be the same. So we will probably no, I mean we'll get all the necessary information from the provider, like the SPC, like the provider name, the authentication methods, and things like that. And the secret that we would want to actually sync, we will define that in the secret sync class. So there will be like 1:1 mapping. But this was the rationale behind it.
yeah. Okay, thanks. Just I was just curious. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So
Right? Any
thanks.
other questions for the controller?
No.
Okay. I am okay. If there's no other topic, I just wanted to briefly touch on this, right? So there is an effort to move all our tests from the current GKE cluster that we use in test infra to the community pro cluster. Majority of the tests have been moved. And then I think right now we have around 8 or 9 pending tests that we need to move. The Azure ones, basically, I have a PR out. It's very close to being merged. So like that'll take care of 4 of the tests. The remaining ones will be the A keyless one and then the GCP ones. Moving it in terms of moving to the cluster is fairly easy, but the only caveat is I've already talked to Abhijit about this as well. The only caveat is today for the GCP provider, it uses the GKE service account token and it has workload identity set up. So we need to figure out what can be done with the EKS Pro cluster so that you could still continue using workload identity to access the secret manager. And if not that, what is the route? So I know Abhijit, you said you're going to look at it, prioritize it. So
Yeah,
let me know if you have any questions, or we can also reach out to folks on SIG testing or SIG Kubernetes infra, because a lot of Google folks are there, so they can help out as well.
sure, definitely.
Yeah. But I
Thanks.
think we are August 1st is the deadline, and we are mostly good because with my PR, 4 of them should be done, and then we would just have the GCP ones. And I think if we figure out, then that'll take care of all the GCP jobs. So,
Yeah. Uh, I will take a look into this.
right. Okay. Uh, Anything else anyone wants to discuss, talk about?
Nothing. But thanks for the answers and explanation.
Yeah. And also on the controller front, like if you're interested, if you find any issues that you want to contribute to, like feel free to reach out, open a PR, or like just ping us on Slack. We are always looking for new contributors. So uh, and if it's something that you want to help out with, there are issues. So like if there's anything that interests you, just ping us and then we can tell you how we can work on it together.
Sure, definitely.
Okay,
Yes.
that's it.
Thanks.
Nilik, did you have anything else that you want to talk about? No?
No, okay.
Okay, cool. Uh, Thank you, everyone. See you again maybe in 2 weeks.
Bye bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.